Again, I think anyone that's barking that like this is good or bad for every human, they clearly don't know what they're talking about because we are all very different. I think that and vitamin D, I think those are the top two most wrongly demonized supplements. Does everyone need high doses? No, of course not. But the same exact thing that healed you is rarely what keeps you healthy.
Tyler, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, my man.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you because you cover something that tends to go a little bit under the radar in health information, which is, the bioindividuality and how your genes affect how you respond to different foods and supplements and those kind of things, which, many people kind of know already, but in the health space, there's always tends to be like this one size fits all solution to all the problems out there. But the reality is that it's a lot more nuanced and complex than that. So yeah, I'm excited to have a discussion with you about it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that there's an overabundance of people, especially on social media now, right, that can say or regurgitate, the information that you read on a supplement label, right, or on the bottle, or, we know this supplement helps with inflammation, this or that, but what else is it doing in the body, right? I'm sure you know this, every supplement or nutrient has many mechanisms. And we really need to also make sure that not just that mechanisms serve us, but not that some of those mechanisms don't also, have deleterious or negative effects on our physiology.
Mm. Yeah, maybe you can also talk a little bit about how you got into this and what your like backstory, because it's quite interesting how you like, stumbled upon this field yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So, always really loved science. I actually wanted to be the next crocodile hunter when I was a kid. So really loved animals. Steve Irwin was, my idol, rest in peace. So when it came to biology, I always loved biology, but it was more, we'll call it the macrobiology, right? More like animal biology. I think it was 11th grade. I took biology and we talked about cells, and just so fascinating that it's like we have a whole city or a world inside of each one of our cells, all these organelles, all these proteins doing these things. So I did my undergrad at University of South Florida in molecular and cellular biology. Um, Loved the molecular side, really got into supplements, biohacking, was making my own pre-workout in my dorm room and, like selling that at the school gym and stuff, and just how you can, ooh, I put, this stimulant in there. I'm way more anxious than if I just take caffeine, really interesting. All these little things, how I can make myself more calm if I want to be more calm based on what I put in my body, or more energized. I was trying to figure out what to do after that. And ironically enough, I didn't want to work with people directly. I didn't want to be a doctor, people yelling at me for, drugs or this or that. And pharmacy, I didn't really want to be yelled at for, again, medications and stuff. And one of my professors mentioned pharmacology, and, the questions I would ask, I think you do well in research, looked up what pharmacology was. And I'm like, this is literally me. Ironically, I didn't realize what pharmacology was until end of undergrad, but knowing the why, I looked down at my coffee and I'm like, oh, so it doesn't magically wake me up. There's a molecule that blocks a receptor, which blocks the tired signal. So that's why I'm awake, right? So knowing the why there, I decided to do a PhD right out undergrad in pharmacology, and I did some stem cell work, anxiety work, ended up doing my thesis work on breast cancer metastasis. And I remember a period of poor health. I've dealt with, anxiety, brain fog, sleep issues. And I got my 23andMe done. And this was probably 7, 8 years ago. And I thought I was going to change my life, all these great insights. And back then, 23andMe was not what it is now. And it was like more likely to think cilantro tastes like soap, or more likely to have your pee smell weird when you eat asparagus. And I'm like, that's cool, but that's
Mm.
not really going to impact my health. So I looked in the raw data myself, figured out some of my mutations, and was able to do targeted supplementation. Doctors wanted to put me on medications for some of these things, and I changed my life within a matter of days or, a week or two. And that's when I decided I want to be in personalized medicine. So after I graduated, I worked at an oncology company doing next generation sequencing analysis for about a year and a half. Started doing what I do now, working with people one on one, started my business. And it's been a little over 2 years since I've been doing that full time. Worked with over 700 people. And here we are now, just trying to bridge the gap between not just conventional medicine and holistic medicine, but also really ways of awareness. I think genetics are very undervalued by how we analyze them clinically, and the supplement pharmacology. I mean, you know this, it's like the Wild West out there. Thank God they have people like you or me that can help cut some of the noise, but there's a lot of BS out there.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Even starting with the fact that most supplements aren't regulated and, you're not really sure what you're getting unless it's actually purity tested and third party tested. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned that mixing your pre-workouts and stuff like that's, essentially like what bodybuilders did several decades ago is what, biohackers are doing now, or
Yep.
yeah, like pharmacology is like what bodybuilders are like specialized in. So it's yeah, very interesting that a lot of people who are in this field have like this history of kind of a bro bodybuilding age,
Exactly. And
me
like I
myself included.
yeah, and like I love like following the work of like, you familiar with like Milo Sarshev?
Mm. Yeah, I've
Like
heard
he
of it.
he
Yeah.
he was a really big pioneer, really like science based, and with the pharmacology stuff, you're totally right, right? And it's interesting when it comes to biohacking. A very immediate readout you could get is how well you perform in the gym, right? Like that could be, you take some beta alanine, or you could feel that difference that very day on that workout, right? You could really tell what's working or not. So yeah, I never thought about it that way. There are a lot of people do have that more bro background, but then adding that education, right, to know the
Mm.
why underneath.
Yeah. So maybe yeah, we can maybe start with the kind of those supplements in the physical performance area, most specifically probably like caffeine that has like a huge genetic component, and there's famously like these slow metabolizers and fast metabolizers of caffeine that some people like burn through it very fast and others get sleep problems even from a single cup of coffee. So yeah, like what can you tell us, let's say maybe about caffeine supplements or
Yeah.
caffeine alone as well?
Yeah. So, a lot of people talk about that sit metabolism, right, for the caffeine breakdown. And there's different, mechanisms or layers to any interaction to any substance or supplement. So that's absolutely true. How quickly or slowly you metabolize the caffeine molecule. There's also things like how quickly you metabolize the adrenaline or the neurotransmitters that caffeine makes you release. So, certain mutations like the COMT gene or MAO gene, these can affect how quickly you break down dopamine and adrenaline. So, I have a double slow COMT mutation. That was actually the first gene I figured out for myself years ago, and it made a lot of sense why I'm very go, 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 extroverted, type A, prone to stress, because I'm just sensitive, right? A lot of that dopamine, adrenaline, sensitive to caffeine as well. Um, there's also some really cool mutations in the adenosine receptor itself. So there's how much of the molecules floating around for how long. There's how tightly it binds to the adenosine receptor. So if that receptor itself is mutated in a certain way, those people, it doesn't affect the serum levels of caffeine or the metabolism, but it actually affects the responsiveness. So people with that mutation, they are more prone to anxiety because the caffeine molecule can bind it more strongly. So, I mean, just right there, there's three different things to juggle, right? Like sometimes I'll work with people, they don't metabolize caffeine slowly, but they're very sensitive to it, right? So, there's a lot of different alternatives out there to these xanthine type molecules. Dynamine is one, teocrine, paraxanthine. These are all very similar in structure there. Have you tried any of those?
I've tried the paraxanthine. Yeah,
How'd you like that one?
uh yeah, I mean I took it when I was about Sean Wells gave it to me when I was
Yeah.
before going on a stage to speak. Uh but I had caffeine a few hours before that as well, so I don't know exactly if
Yeah.
how it affected. But yeah, I mean, I drank this drink with the baraxanthine, and yeah, I mean, I did, I guess, feel a little bit
Yeah.
more fluent with words.
Yeah, I tried it on its own. It's one of I realized for myself, I like it. It's one of those things that I still like having. I'll lower my caffeine dosage. I'll like do a quarter of the dose with a little bit. Just personally, it's all about, you want to be calm, cool, collected, but sometimes it's good to have a little bit of that punch, right? So you actually
Mm,
want to get these things done, right?
right.
But yeah, it could go. Depends how deep you want to go, right? Because technically, you also have the GABA system. If that's not working as well, you could be more anxious from caffeine, right?
Mm,
Serotonin. It goes on and on. To me, it's everything can affect everything, right? But depends how deep you want to go with that. But yeah, I've seen a lot of people really benefit from the theacrine. So theacrine is a longer acting. If you guys that don't know, it's a longer acting, more mild form of caffeine. It's still naturally plant-based from the same family of plants, but when I work with people that have that adenosine receptor mutations, they respond really well to that. They're like, this is what caffeine should feel like. I feel peppy, but not my heart's beating out of my chest.
mm,
I think Dynamine's a shorter acting one they use in a lot of pre-workouts. I like that one a lot, and that I'll use sometimes. I normally train first thing in the morning, but if I'm training midday, you can kind of it can come in and come out really quick in the body, right? So you're not worried about it really affecting the sleep.
mm. Yeah, I'm fortunate, like a fast metabolizer. Like I can drink coffee for dinner and still fall asleep
Yeah.
quite easily. Um, but I do notice that if I take like pre-workout that has caffeine, then that tends to like put me over the edge a little bit with sleep. Like if my daily dose limit is something like maybe 300 milligrams. If I go like above that, then I start to have some sleep issues. But I usually, yeah, I'll metabolize it quite fast. Other than that, I also
Yeah.
like to combine it with like theanine. That's very like this classic nootropic stack that you combine coffee with theanine, like 200 milligrams or something, and that kind of like helps to smooth it out a little bit.
Yeah, they put that in a lot of pre-workouts now too.
Mm,
And like a lot of people too, aren't aware about all these other, I call them adrenaline boosters.
mm,
So caffeine, we know it dumps adrenaline, but you also have so many ingredients in pre-workouts that also boost adrenaline. Whether it's an L-tyrosine or an L-dopa, those are giving your body more ingredients to make adrenaline. But a lot of people aren't aware of a lot of these inhibitors of the COMT or MAO gene. So basically, it's like imagine if your adrenaline was in a bathtub and there's only one drain and you could plug the drain with these supplements, right? So things like the rhodiola rosea or things like the astragalus root. Yohimbe doesn't dump adrenaline, but it mimics adrenaline. So I realized really quick, which before I knew what I knew, which pre-workouts would really just send me over the edge. And I'm really vocal about there's so many other supplements out there that also block these genes.
mm,
So things like methylene blue, whole list of benefits. I've seen it really mess people up because they get so overstimulated and anxious. I can't really tolerate any of that. I mean, I have maybe 50 milligrams of caffeine a day at this point, just
mm,
because of all the other stuff, like whether it's NMN, this or that, these are stimulatory, right? I got to be
right.
very mindful of the overall energy sources, but people will take a thyroid supplement that has tyrosine, astragalus root, licorice root,
Mhm.
and they wonder why they're losing their marbles because
Yeah.
they're jacking up this adrenaline and there's just not enough education. Like
Mm,
a lot of natural supplements for brain health or joint health or gut health, they have a lot of similar ingredients to some pre-workouts. They don't have the caffeine,
yeah.
but they have the other things. So you have caffeine in the morning, you have your cup of coffee, you take some of these supplements. No wonder why you're overstimulated, but you can't really figure out why. And maybe you have to take a bunch of calming supplements, or I've even seen some people have to go on medication. We remove these supplements that are raising adrenaline. They don't need that medication anymore.
Right. Yeah, like uppers and downers, like vicious cycle and fixing the things from the side effects from other things. Um, Another like popular workout supplement is, creatine, and there's a lot of like fears and misconceptions about creatine, but there's also, yeah, some people who might not do well with it. So what do you know about creatine?
Yeah, creatine. I mean, I think it's definitely the most well-studied one we have, right? Like it is so many bodies of evidence, not just for muscle strength, performance. I saw you made a post. I made a post too about the sleep deprivation side of stuff, right? I just made a post about topical creatine for skin health. There's some early data for, I think what it might have been Parkinson's, some neurodegenerative disorder. It helps you make ATP, right? And I think it is a very safe supplement for all to try and experiment with. But, what are the risks here? GI upset, that's probably the most common one. But that's, you may have to try maybe a micronized creatine. I mean, personally, I mean, what do you think? I think monohydrate's the king still, based on the data
Yeah.
we see.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
That's usually what I recommend. Micronized can be a bit better for the GI. They shown with doesn't really affect the kidneys. But one interesting thing is that creatine is also a methyl donor, meaning people talk about MTHFR, right? And methylation. Well, you need methylation to make creatine.
Mm.
So if you need to methylate to make creatine, that means it's a methyl group, meaning certain people that are sensitive. So it helps. Let me put it this way. The reason why it could help with mental health is that it has methyl groups that can help you make more neurotransmitters, right? It can help you make more ATP for cellular energy, which is huge for brain health, but also it can help you make neurotransmitters by donating that methyl group. Now, what else does methylation do? Methylation also helps us convert norepinephrine into epinephrine. So, yeah, was it dopamine to norepinephrine or epinephrine? Yeah, norepinephrine to epinephrine to help you make adrenaline. So, for people that are sensitive to adrenaline like me, it can make people feel overstimulated or anxious. So some people say they get super anxious from it. It could be because it's too much methyl groups for you. Maybe you're taking too much methylfolate, methyl B12. I mean, so many people are overdosing on those two nowadays, right? Just with all
Mhm.
the MTHFR stuff. But there's that. And, people talk about the DHT aspect too
Mm.
for the hair loss aspect. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I've seen, I think, one or two studies that it can raise DHT, but I haven't seen any studies actually conclusively linking it to that DHT leading to that hair loss.
Yeah, like there was this one study that found that giving these athletes, even like, yeah, they did like a loading phase with creatine, something like 20 grams for 5 days and then 5 grams for 2 weeks, 5 grams for 2 weeks and something like that. And they did see that, yeah, like there was an increase in DHT levels. But yeah, they didn't, they didn't measure hair loss or anything
Yeah.
like that in that
Yeah.
study. So people, jumped the conclusion that, okay, the increased DHT, then therefore it means that creatine causes hair loss. But yeah, there's no study that actually has replicated that, and no study actually looking at if creatine causes hair loss or not. And in that study, I think I remember that the baseline DHT levels in those individuals was already lower. So yeah, creatine
Mm,
increases DHT, but if you were coming from a baseline, yeah, there's gonna be a, relatively speaking, a big percentage increase, but it didn't reach supraphysiological levels. Kind of, it didn't go above
yep.
normal from
Yep.
creatine. So yeah, it's kind of a interesting. Many people anecdotally say that they take creatine and they experience hair loss, but I personally haven't seen any studies kind of actually proving that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point you just brought up, right? It's about how high are you going,
Mm,
right? Where are you starting from? Where are you ending at? And, this is a concept I'm really vocal about is when you think about these studies, for any clinical study, they get a bunch of people and they run the study. They don't check to see, well, that study checked the DHT initially. That's a good starting point, right? But most studies don't. So I've worked with people, I've seen it firsthand. Creatine cause hair loss in certain individuals, but guess what? Those individuals had mutations for higher DHT, right? So they
mm,
were already starting out in that
right.
area. And the way we study these things is it's kind of flawed in certain ways because you can't just get a bunch of people with all different levels of baseline DHT and then see if creatine does that, right? I feel that if you structure studies where you actually put higher risk people in the study, you would get more negative effects, right? But it's kind of like we try to do a study where we get a smorgasbord, a blend of different people, throw them all in a study. Oh, it does or doesn't do this for humans.
Mm,
But for some humans, it can. And that's kind of how my brain looks at, of course, I read peer reviewed studies, but I take all of them with a grain of salt because I work one on one, not one to many. So whoever's in front of me. So I have seen the creatine contribute to hair loss for people with higher DHT levels. So I think if you're someone that has high DHT levels, then and you are trying to keep your hair, I do think that could potentially be worth being mindful of. But again, you could also combine it with things that lower DHT, right? Like the saw palmetto or reishi mushroom. So you can enjoy the benefits of the creatine. So
mm.
the DHT goes up, but you could also kind of lower it a little bit. And what do you know? Reishi is also great for a lot of immune and exercise things as well. It's like a 2-for-1. So kind of, how my brain
Right.
works. You want to enjoy all the benefits. Like imagine if you don't eat a lot of red meat and you're low on creatine, but you're high in DHT, right? How do you kind of work around that? That's where using the right, team of nutrients can really make all the difference.
Yeah, yeah, it depends a lot. Yeah, like your baseline DHT, and it's not a common biomarker or a lab marker that people measure. So they would have to like specifically measure it, which takes again more
Yeah.
effort and more money and more time. But
I mean,
yeah,
if they even check it, right? A lot of doctors will just say it's not even
yeah,
important and you believe them, right?
yeah. I mean, and it's again how much people actually do to see if something causes it or not, because some we're not like perfect scientific machines, the human
Mhm.
mind. Like
No, far from it. Yeah.
we're not like able to control for all the confounding variables in our head. Like, okay, I I'm aware of how much calories I ate, I'm aware of my DHT levels before taking creatine, etc. Like we're not perfect.
Like
We're not like
you can't sit there and be
yeah.
like, oh, I could feel the DHT right now, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in a perfect world, you would like have all this information before making those decisions, but most people don't do it. And in a lot of cases, you might not need it, but if there are some things that puzzle you or are causing problems, then yeah, you would need to do further testing and see what's the actual issue.
Yep.
I want to take a quick break to let you know that you can now get my new book, The Longevity Leap, on Amazon. It contains 24 chapters ranging from the biology of aging to all the major chronic diseases such as heart disease, kidney disease, neurodegeneration, and I also cover over 70 clinically relevant biomarkers for chronic diseases and their optimal ranges. You can get the book from the link in the description. Any other like workout supplements? I think there's a lot of like these pump increasers like let's say citrulline or arginine and those things. Are there any
Yeah.
like genetic effects on those?
Yeah. So, yeah, there are a lot of mutations that can indicate a higher need for specifically arginine or for specifically L-citrulline. Um, and it's not always just talking about the one gene, right? It's all about something called polygenic risk score. And I'm sure you're familiar with it, but for you guys listening, that's poly meaning many, genic meaning genes. It's not just if you have a higher need. Sorry, not just if you have one mutation. So I'm looking right here. I'm curious I forgot how much just for I'm curious to see real quick the citrulline report I have here. I'm just looking real quick to see how many just to give you an idea. Yeah, so 11,245 SNPs went into analyzing your overall need for citrulline. So you see
Mm.
how it's a lot deeper than just saying you have one gene, you need more citrulline, right? Even for some people, for myself, I respond really well to agmatine sulfate. So agmatine is a metabolite, of arginine, and that step that metabolizes, that creates arginine, sorry, that creates agmatine, mine doesn't work very well. So I switched from arginine to agmatine and I noticed massive differences. I have several mutations in that NOS3 gene. So that's the gene that synthesizes nitric oxide. So it's funny. I've been bodybuilding, I don't know, for what, 15 plus years at this point. And maybe 2, 3 years ago, I found out about this mutation. I tried arginine, then I switched to agmatine. Bro, I was like, oh my, I had to stop working out. My arms are gonna explode. Like I've never now I understood what a pump really was, if that makes sense, right? And I'm like, I feel like I wasted my time all these years, right? Not getting that proper blood flow. But yeah, again, when you map out, you need more nitric oxide, but which step do you need more nitric oxide for? Do you need more arginine or agmatine or citrulline? Or there's things like pycnogenol from the pine bark extract that also
Right.
can raise nitric oxide, right? So it's like there's all these ways you can help with insert whatever you want to work on. But for any one thing you want to improve on, there's countless natural things to do it. How do you know which nitric oxide booster you need? That's where the genetics really come into play and can really fine tune these things. It doesn't mean I get zero benefit from arginine, right? But for people that are struggling and things aren't working, or people that really want to min max things, I think genetic testing is really undervalued in a lot of ways.
Hmm. What about people who have like some cardiovascular risk? Would those people then like benefit more from these NO boosters?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting too. It's like, people like to think in terms of labels or diagnoses, meaning, oh, I have this NOS3 gene mutation. That's why I have erectile dysfunction, right? Because nitric oxide helps with blood flow. Well, it's also linked to, like, what does nitric oxide do in the body overall, right? It's also linked to neurotransmission, so brain health effects. It's also linked to preeclampsia. It's also linked to cardiovascular risk. So, yes, people that have these NOS3 mutations, the higher blood pressure, right? All these different things. And that's why it's, the same thing that helps with erectile dysfunction can help you get a better pump at the gym, can lower your blood pressure, can help with histamine, right? But we're trained a lot to think in terms of just that one angle. If you're a heart doctor, you only think of it from that angle. Like people asking, what's a good what's a good brain health supplement? Well, let's just take let's take glycine. I know you love glycine. It's probably my favorite. I know it's one of your favorites. I think it's one of my favorite longevity molecules as well. And it's good for brain health, but it's good for everything else too. Because when you take a supplement, it doesn't just go to your brain.
Right.
It nourishes every cell in your body. All of your cells have receptors, or they uptake or absorb these nutrients. And depending on the cell type in your body, it's going to respond differently. A joint cell is going to respond differently to a brain cell versus a skin cell.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Speaking of glycine, then I like respond very well to it. Like I don't have any symptoms and negative side effects. A lot of the studies, they're like 90 grams a day, also without side effects. But there's also a lot of people comment often that they take glycine and they get like headache or insomnia or nausea or
Hmm.
something like that, even at like low doses. So what do you think that could be?
Yeah. So yeah, I respond really well as well. What's your normal daily dose? Just curious.
Uh, I take maybe like 10 grams, something like that,
Yeah.
plus 3 grams from collagen, so 13 grams
Nice.
approximately. Yeah.
Yeah. I usually hover around that like seven to eight-ish range, somewhere around there. Yeah, I love that stuff. And it's an added bonus. It tastes so delicious, right? Like I love mixing
Yeah.
that at night into there. It literally tastes like sugar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so one of the things glycine does, it's a coagonist at the NMDA receptor. So this is a receptor for neurotransmission, for how we, feel and how we behave. And it's a coagonist, meaning glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it revs up the brain. But it also helps with memory. Like we need it, right? But too much can be a bad thing. Now, without glycine, or I think serine on either end, glutamate can't activate the receptor. When you activate it, it stimulates you. Magnesium blocks it. That's why it chills you out. Ketamine blocks it. That's why it's pretty much a tranquilizer, right? So the I think for some people they have mutations in that NMDA receptor. So, well, not that I think I've seen this. They have mutations in this NMDA receptor, and theirs might be extra sensitive, more overactive. So the glycine can help stimulate the receptor. But if you're more sensitive to glutamate, or if you have more glutamate floating around in the brain, it can lead to those symptoms. Because again, you know, if instead of labels, we think in terms of pathways, excess glutamate, whether it's mutations in glutamate signaling or excess glutamate or symptoms from too much glutamine, which gets converted into glutamate, all the same symptoms, right? The headaches, the anxiety, the insomnia. So yeah, that's one, I'm trying to think. That's not a, I don't see that super commonly with people I work with. And glycine's one of those things that even if you don't have a higher genetic need for glycine, I will utilize it a lot of times just since a lot of us aren't eating, we're not consuming enough, right?
Mm.
Like when's the last time someone ate a bone or a tendon or a sinew, right? Unless you're doing a lot of bone broth or unless you're doing, a lot of nose to tail carnivore, you're going to be missing out on a lot of that glycine.
Mm. Yeah, like I don't see it also like a lot these symptoms in people or the but whenever I post about glycine, there's at least like one or two
Yeah.
comments about it. So there's a segment of people that do
Yeah.
respond. And yeah, like I think even like you would need to consume like tons of bone broth or these bones to actually get the adequate amounts of glycine
Yep.
from the dietary sources. Like I don't even know how much you would need to consume, but I mean, if you eat like pork rinds, probably like you can get it. Like 100 grams of pork rinds has like 20 grams of glycine or
That's not a
something.
lot of pork rinds.
Yeah, and
Yeah. And it,
then you have the other issue of the extra calories, extra saturated fat, and those things. So
yeah.
that can be an issue. So
No,
um,
and too, one last thing with the glycine too, like you mentioned a good point there, like the and with the bone broth too, that's also high in glutamate. It's also
mm,
very high in histamine.
mm,
That roasting process, all of the histidine is going to get converted into histamine in the body. That's also excitatory. Like I cannot tolerate bone broth. I get headaches, anxious, don't sleep well. I see that with a lot of people I work with. They think they're doing the right thing having bone broth. Well, it does help with a lot of things, right? But again, what else does it do? If you're very sensitive to histamine or if you're very sensitive to glutamate, they may be a no-go for you, right? And not that it's bad for everyone. But yeah, I feel the same way. The glycine, I talk about it a lot, but there's always a couple of those people there. And yeah, sometimes, magnesium's huge. Magnesium can help with that. Usually people that are more sensitive to it, if they're magnesium deficient, it makes it a lot worse. So sometimes people can tolerate a gram or two is better than zero, right? If they do have that adamant magnesium content.
gotcha. Yeah, the bone broth you mentioned is very, yeah, another very popular these sensitivities, the histamine. So that a lot of fermented foods, just aged food, if your food has been sitting in the even in the fridge for a few days,
Yeah.
it has more these histamines that yeah can be problematic for a lot of people. Like that's why fermented foods aren't like very beneficial for even like a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too that um, a lot of Eastern Asian populations, they have better genetics for gut histamine breakdown.
Mm,
So it's really interesting, like called evolution, if you will, or something, right? Like we get a lot of fermented foods from Asian culture, right? And ironically enough, they're the best genetically equipped to be able to enjoy the benefits, but not absorb all that histamine into their system. The histamine is a huge overlooked factor as well. Like, I'll just give you an example how easy it is for people to overload on histamine. A lot of people I'll work with their morning routine, they'll be fasting, right? Which has its pros and cons, depends on the person, etc. But they wake up in the morning, they have black coffee, freshly roasted, high in histamine. They have apple cider vinegar in the morning, high in histamine. Then they go to the gym. Exercise stimulates histamine release. They feel horrible after the gym. They're off the whole day because you just overloaded so much histamine into your body. Now, I'm not saying those are bad. You'll never hear me say something straight up bad, right? But who would have thought it was the coffee, apple cider vinegar that was like making
mm,
you
deadly
feel
things, yeah.
worse? And of course, then there's the fermented stuff as well, the kimchi, a lot of these things are good for the gut, but if you have histamine issues, it could be deleterious for you.
Mm. Yeah. Like I eat quite a lot of fermented foods. I don't have any like histamine issues. Again, fortunately, like I don't have any like almost any sensitivities to any food.
Yeah.
But yeah, like my wife, for example, she can't eat like a lot of fermented foods, and she has like a lot of other like sensitivities to like
Mhm.
gluten and lectins and those kind of things. So yeah, it's very interesting
Yeah.
that
Has she ever had genetic testing done before?
yeah, I mean she has she might have it from like some mold illness as
Oh,
well.
gotcha. Yeah, there's that
So
aspect too. Yeah.
yeah, so something like this chronic inflammation triggering the autoimmune response. That can be one explanation as well. But yeah, she probably has like some genetic.
And it could be both too, you know,
Yeah.
and like whenever I travel, I always have DAO enzymes.
Mm,
That's basically a digestive enzyme for histamine that you eat. And I always bring molybdenum with me. That's essentially a digestive enzyme for sulfur that you have because I'm sensitive to both, right? So it's like I'll be at an event or something. If they're serving something, with pickles or onions or garlic, if I don't have that, I'll just get the brain fog or I'll kind of feel a little socially awkward. And normally I feel fine, right?
mm,
And again, it's not an outright rule for everyone, right? It's listening to these patterns, but a lot of people spend most of their lives with brain fog. So for me to say, "Oh, just listen to your body," it's like I'm listening. If I always feel like crap, if I always feel like I'm triggered, how do I know what the trigger is, right? That's a big disconnect there. That's why I try to tell people. I just released a histamine course. I'm going to be doing a glutamate course to try to give people actionable tips and make worksheets for people. Imagine if
mm,
you could write out everything you put in your body that day and you could highlight and say, "Wow, there's a lot of glutamate in the morning. I get headaches in the morning. Wow, I have a lot of histamine at night. I don't sleep very well." I truly believe I've seen this with people I work with, especially for more sensitive people, whether it's autism spectrum disorder, OCD, ADHD, those highly sensitive people. These little food related things can actually make a really big difference for people. And not that it's a magic pill cure for everybody, right? But just connecting the molecules in the food and the supplements, right? Oh, I'm taking glutathione, I'm taking alpha lipoic acid, and I'm having eggs for breakfast. I would have a migraine all morning from so much sulfur, right? But not bad for everybody, just depends on the person. But I'm really on a mission to try to help people learn to understand their bodies better, right? Because then everyone's on their phone buying everyone's this, or that that's being marketed to everybody, right? But you don't really know what's right or wrong for you.
yeah. Speaking of these food sensitivities, then nowadays you hear a lot of people talk about different kinds of plant defense chemicals and oxalates, and that all plants are harmful for your digestion and health. So, and there's obviously a lot of people sharing their experience with having negative symptoms with like either a plant-based diet or
Yep.
specific food groups. So yeah, there's obviously like some genetic effect and individual aspect there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the oxalate sensitivity report that I run for clients, I believe that does just over 817,000 SNPs for oxalate sensitivity.
Mm,
Um, Now, again, I think anyone that's barking that like this is good or bad for every human, they clearly don't know what they're talking about, because we are all very different. That being said, you do have things like genetics, but also mold, gut health. Some people really don't do well with oxalates. And I'll ask people with that report comes up, do you have any history of kidney stones in the family? And probably 80% of the time, these people say yes. I'm like, well, based on a lot of genetic data, you're sensitive to these things. But my personal belief and what works for me, and I think that a balanced diet, lean animal proteins, fruits, vegetables, low GI carbs. I think that works the majority of the time for majority of people. And I do think these more extreme type diets, whether it's deep keto or carnivore or pro metabolic, I think these should be more short midterm tools to kind of reset. Even going vegan or vegetarian, right? I see the benefit in removing meat for a period of time to try to work through some things. But I think the longer you do these more extreme diets, I do think down the road you'll run into some sort of complications and issues. I think trying to resemble your diet towards your lineage is really important, right? Because when we say eat ancestrally, that means different for different people. You
Mm,
know, if you're from Russia, you're gonna be eating a lot of like animal fat, right? Animal meat, right? Not a lot of like foliage there to eat versus someone in the Caribbean, right? It really depends on the person.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess the worst thing is to like marry to a particular diet and make everything about that and kind of get stuck in a way of eating that even if
A
your
lot like
like
it's a religion, right? And
health gets
sadly,
worse.
too many people do that, right?
Yeah.
They get so personally attached to that identity of, hey, this helped me. Now I have to do it forever. I mean, even Paul Saladino, carnivore MD, he was deep carnivore and then he switched and started adding in fruits, right? And I'm like, is that because he got into, health issues? I have no idea, right? But I think what heals you, the same exact thing that healed you is rarely what keeps you healthy, right? Like you go on all these methylated B vitamins when you're doing really sick and you need that support. But then when you're doing better, you don't need all those methyl vitamins all the time, right? And that's why it's hard because you work with someone to figure out what you need for your body, but then the body does change over time, right? So
Mm.
how do you kind of know when to move in or pull back on these things? It could get complicated.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned the methyl donors, and this is one example that I had maybe that was influenced by genetics. Yeah, I was my homocysteine was something like 11 last July, and it should ideally want to have it like slightly lower, below 10 or closer to 5. I added TMG, took like 4 grams of TMG, which is kind of the upper dose that you would want to take. Uh, Also took like B complex, etc. My homocysteine dropped to like 9, and it didn't get lower even if I increased my TMG from 2 grams to 4 grams.
Mm.
Uh, One thing I did change was I started doing this HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Did it for 2 months, and that might drop my homocysteine to like 5.5.
Oh, wow.
So that was the only thing I changed. That was actually the result of this dramatic decrease. Whereas the methyl donors and the TMG, which are known to decrease homocysteine,
Mhm.
they did it only to a certain extent. They didn't have any additional benefits. But I've seen online as well people who I guess have a similar situation, but they respond very well to B12 or TMG, whatever it is. That with those additional supplements, they just decrease their homocysteine to 5 from 12 or something like
Yep.
that. So yeah, maybe like your body responds differently to these different methyl donors. In my example.
Yeah, and there's maybe your body just doesn't really require that betaine, right? Because it's like I think that goes through the BHMT gene is what uses betaine. So
Mm.
maybe yours wasn't as mutated, right? And other donors, phosphatidylcholine is another good one as well, creatine, right? And yeah, for some people there's all these different genes. So there's all these genes that methylate to make all these nutrients, right? So the genes can kind of figure out, do you need more methyl donors from phosphatidylcholine? Do you need more from creatine, right? But that's really interesting with the hyperbaric oxygen. Is that like a commonly known benefit? Like, is it been published? I'm not familiar with it that much. Is it commonly known to lower that homocysteine, or was it like an added benefit you didn't expect?
Well, it doesn't have actual like research that it lowers homocysteine. The reason I started doing it was because my wife was doing HBOT herself before for her mold illness recovery, and she saw her homocysteine also go from something like 10 something to 5, and then was like, hey, I'll try it myself, and yeah, it worked for me too. So I did
Super
it
cool. And you said
probably.
you did it for a few months?
I did it for something like 15 sessions is when I tested it. Uh, but I did a total of 20 sessions. Yeah, something like twice a week on average.
Yeah, that stuff I've been wanting to get more. I've been really focused on, the vitamins, nutrients type of stuff, but I've been reading more into, I guess we'll just call it the more like the experiential biohacks, if that makes sense, right? That aren't, something you take like pharmacologically there.
Right.
What are some things that you see on the horizon, like really interesting type of modalities that have caught your eye lately?
Um, well, there's a lot of talk about these microplastics, right? So I was researching, okay, other ways to actually eliminate them. Blood donation is one thing that was seen to reduce these forever chemicals in people. Uh, but there's also this thing called like plasma donation, plasma exchange, and
Hmm.
EBO, which is this extracorporeal blood ozone oxygenation therapy, where they take out your blood, they filter it, they ozonate it, and they actually shine UV light as well into it, and then you
Mm,
get the purified blood back into your system. So theoretically that could also filter out some of those microplastic particles, and it's used for certain autoimmune conditions, like actually medically used for those conditions, and certain like inflammatory conditions as well. So it could also be like an actual anti-aging hack where
hmm.
you're like filtering your blood and removing certain like old proteins and bacteria and viruses and those kind of things. Plus, it might have like some microplastic effects as well.
Now, I'm curious, when this gets posted, is it going to be video along with this or just the audio?
Video too, yeah.
Okay. No, I'm just saying I really, really appreciate you put the anti-aging in a little bit of air quotes, right? Because even I love that even you, a longevity specialist, right? I love that you can acknowledge that like it's still speculative for I think without a doubt these modalities extend health span,
Mm.
right? But I just love. There's just so much people just sensationalizing the hell out of everything, right? Saying that NAD pill will add 10 years on your life. I'm just really glad to see you put it in. Not that we don't believe in it, right? But we do need to
Right.
follow the science first. So I really do appreciate that. But the microplastic stuff that did you see that recent study that came out with the dementia?
That in the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really wild. And, I saw that and I was, one thing I utilize for people if we think there's a microplastic issue, sulforaphane has some data, but chlorella actually there's studies that it's used to remove plastics from aquatic environments. So
Mm.
there's no data that it actually helps a human being lower it. But again, I'm not evidence based. I like to say I'm evidence guided, science based, right? So I mean, chlorella. I mean, how many benefits are there, anyways, right? Reading between the lines, I'm like, okay, well, we don't have a lot of peer reviewed options here for actual detox, and EBOO, that's not cheap, right? So something
Mm.
people could
Yeah.
try as well. That chlorella as well. Have you done the EBOO? Is
No,
that how you say
no.
it?
Ebo, I think it's
EBO.
yeah. Yeah, it's something like $2,000 or something in the States.
Jeez.
But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things if you search for it, you do find some molecules and ingredients that have like some preclinical data and some experimental studies that they might help with breaking down BPA or certain like microplastics.
Mm.
Certain mushrooms, they use mushrooms in the like environmental pollution to degrade the environmental plastics.
Yeah, I saw that, right?
Chlorella as well, yeah.
Yeah, was that engineered or it's naturally occurring, that mushroom?
Not sure. I haven't specifically looked at it, but yeah, even melatonin. So melatonin is like powerful antioxidant.
Mhm.
It also apparently has like potential to like degrade BPA. So makes sense. Your body is detoxing every night, and the lymphatic system specifically works like this plump pump that
Mhm.
eliminates toxins from the brain, including different proteins and potentially nanoparticles as well.
And now, what do you like to say to people that say no one should ever take melatonin because it's a hormone?
Well, it's a hormone, but it doesn't work like testosterone. Like your body makes melatonin in response to the absence of light primarily. So it doesn't work like testosterone that there's always some testosterone in your blood, right? And there's some diurnal variation, like it's higher in the morning and lower in the evening, but there's always testosterone in your blood. If you're exposed to these kind of bright lights and like sunlight, then your melatonin production is, mediated by gut hormones and light cues. It's not like that there is a specific diurnal rhythm that is independent of those things. It's more about the cues, that these Zeitgebers that regulate your circadian rhythm and then produces the melatonin in response to those cues. So yeah,
I think it's
and
I think it's one of the most wrongly demonized supplements, if you
yeah.
ask me. I think it's just really I think it's wild. I think that and vitamin D. I think those are the top two most wrongly demonized supplements. Does everyone need high doses? No, of course not.
Mm,
But I think it's really interesting that the same practitioners that say don't take vitamin D or don't take melatonin, their hormones, they'll also prescribe testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone.
mm,
Right. So you see, it's kind of like hypocritical. Like you should kind of pickle one lane or another
right.
lane. Right. And it's like, yeah, I think they are really different. And it depends. Right. Like there's mutations in that clock gene that's how our cells tell what time of day it is. So if your cells can't tell what time of day it is, you won't release as much melatonin at night if you have that mutation. Maybe you can't synthesize melatonin. I have mutations in my melatonin receptors, the 1A and 1B receptors. Um, so I've been taking melatonin. I It's interesting. The same gene that metabolizes caffeine also metabolizes melatonin.
Mm,
So I need more melatonin, but I break it down slowly. So I do maybe no more than a milligram, usually around half a milligram each night. That's all I need personally. But the lost my train of thought. With the melatonin, the clock genes, studies on that say if you're very sensitive to light when you sleep, like if you're trying to sleep and if there's that tiny little blue light, you got to cover it up across the room or anything, that's a good indicator you have these melatonin receptor mutations because these receptors, they're in our eyes, right? For melatonin as well there. I love finding those little patterns, right? So even if you don't want to get a genetic test done, you can kind of read between the lines and try to figure that out about your health.
mm. Yeah, I like melatonin as well, and there's no study that actually shows that it inhibits natural melatonin production even at like
Yep.
very large doses.
Yep.
So yeah, it's more about like the light cues and the other signals from the gut and those things. Interesting, actually, like your gut makes a lot more melatonin than your pineal gland. I think it was something like 400 times more from the gut than from the pineal gland.
Yeah, I know your mitochondria you have daytime melatonin too, like within the mitochondria as well. I think that's a higher proportion versus the pineal amount too. So yeah, I mean, I like to classify it as a detox antioxidant more than a sleep aid, right? Have you
Yeah.
ever tried the mega high doses of it?
I've tried like 10 milligrams. I haven't done the 100 milligrams,
Okay.
but yeah, 10 milligrams for a week, and occasionally on and off I take that.
And now you took that before bed?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know I worked with some people for like long COVID. I would utilize that 50, 100, even up to 200 milligrams. It's interesting for a lot of these
How do you
people.
get that?
Uh,
How-
there's there, there's one on Amazon. I forgot the brand. It's a brand sold directly from the vendor, but
Mm,
they sell 100 milligram pills of that.
wow.
Now, interestingly, a lot of those people would actually get more energized. So you take it in the morning. So it's kind of again one of those biphasic responses to that. Again, the genes are just so funny. My wife, she's a ultra fast metabolizer, the CYP1A2, kind of like you, and she can take triple, quadruple the melatonin dose I do. She'll still bounce out of bed, and I can still sometimes be a little groggy if I go over a milligram. So it's just
Mm,
so I don't know, it's just so fascinating. People still try to act like genetics aren't a thing, but it's like they are a thing. We just need to find better ways to map things out properly and present them. I think the majority of these testings out there, they could throw whatever marketing they want on the front end. None of this stuff is really clinically verified on the back end, right? So
mm,
it's like you could have the same DNA, three different companies, and they're saying different things. Like, how do you know what to listen to? Just goes to show how important the interpretation is versus just that testing.
mm. Yeah. When I take melatonin, the 10 milligrams, I did feel like kind of groggy and tired in the morning.
Yeah.
So, but if I take 0.3 milligrams, then I feel very good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Where's that threshold, right?
mm,
Like, where do you got to hit before it starts waking you up, you know?
yeah. You mentioned the vitamin D, and I recall you saying in other interviews that you had some problems getting vitamin D from the sun. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the DHCR7 gene, that's the gene that takes that UVB radiation and converts cholesterol into pre-vitamin D. Mutations in that gene, as you'd expect in the literature, it's linked to lower vitamin D, circulating vitamin D levels. It's also linked to vitamin D related illnesses. So, whether it's type 1 diabetes or multiple sclerosis or mood related issues. So, I love the beach and I was, this was, I don't know how many years ago, probably 8, 9 years ago. Um, lot of inflammatory issues, anxiety issues. And I was going to the beach all the time. My levels were pretty low. And the doctor, wanted me to supplement. So I went on a vitamin D supplement and I was taking, I think, 10,000 IUs. And my levels went up by, I think 10 or 11 nanograms per milliliter, which is not really much at all. And I'm like, why didn't my levels go up? I'm on 10,000 IUs. They're like, I don't know. Go up to 30,000 IUs a day. That'll get you where you need to be. And this is kind of the same time I was getting into the genetics. So I looked at the vitamin D pathway. That DHCR7 gene is what makes it from sunlight, but then you have to hydroxylate it. That's done by the CYP2R1 gene. Turns out I have 5 mutations in that gene. So the vitamin D I'm taking, that cholecalciferol, 99.9% of people that take vitamin D are taking, you need to convert it. So if you're listening and your vitamin D levels don't go up on blood work with supplementation, they try to give you an injection that still doesn't go up. It's not an absorption issue, it's a conversion issue. So then I went and I found an over the counter brand of the pre activated vitamin D. I took it. Within 2 days, I felt so much better. And within 3 weeks, my levels were actually too high. I had to back off on the dosing because again, it was a conversion issue genetically. So that's a calcifediol supplementation for that. And Vitamor D is the brand that I love for that. They ship globally. And it's the exact form your body needs to circulate and do all these good things. You got to be careful. It can go up very, very high. I recommend starting out with 1 tablet, but for people with a lot of mutations in that conversion, that is probably one of the most life-changing adjustments I make for people. We know how important vitamin D is, but imagine if whether you get it through food, through a supplement, or through sunlight, there's still a massive roadblock. So, how do you address that? The people that say no one should take vitamin D, we make it from sunlight. Not everyone makes it from sunlight the same. So, all these people that are outright against vitamin D, some of these, I'm not going to name names, but people will tag me in stuff that says never take vitamin D because people know I'm a big vitamin D guy. And I politely try to mention the genetic aspect. They'll ignore me, they'll block me, they'll delete my comment, right? And it's like, I love being proved wrong, right? Because you're getting closer to the truth, right? We should be excited to have these types of conversations. But hey, some people like to, make their whole identity about one, dogmatic thing and run with it. It is what
Mm.
it is. But as time goes on, I hope throughout my career I can really show to people that vitamin D is really undervalued for a lot of people. And
Mm.
yeah, I mean, I like people to be around that 50 to 70 nanogram per milliliter range for most people. But then there's also the vitamin D receptors. So receptor mutations are really interesting to me because they fundamentally change how you read blood work. Some people need to go up to 100 nanograms per milliliter. That receptor is barely working. You can't detect the vitamin D. I mean, you guys use nanomoles, right?
Yeah, but I
Yeah, so
usually
they're probably
understand milligrams.
around like 250 or so nanomole per liter. That's really really high by normal standards, but if your cells can't detect it properly, now you finally feel it how you should. So kind of a rant there. We could do a whole talk just about vitamin D,
Mhm.
but it's not always just take more magnesium and boron and you'll be fine. A lot of people still have hardwired genetic issues that are doing all the right things and it's still not going up. And that
Mm.
form of vitamin D, that Vitamore D, can really be a game changer.
Mm. Yeah, and usually those people then they don't live in Northern Europe for
Yes, well
some reason.
that as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And,
they
they
don't.
have they have like the spermy lamps and all these vitamin D lamps, and that's great. But if you can't convert sunlight to vitamin D very well, that might help, but you're not going to be getting the full benefit there, right? So there's all these other weird rabbit holes, this or that really just does depend on the person.
Mm. Yeah. One supplement I do want to talk about as well is omega 3s. So, very kind of evidence-based supplement, or there's a lot of like evidence about the benefits of omega 3s and having the higher omega 3 index. But there's also like some of these, I guess, one counter arguments always is that it increases your risk of atrial fibrillation and palpitations, so that you shouldn't take omega 3s. So, is there any like genetic risk for the atrial fibrillation?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I don't have a peer-reviewed study to point to, right? But based on the work that I do, right? When you think about it, fish are very high in amines, biogenic amines. So histamine is an amine.
Mm,
So um, these amines in fish, if you're sensitive to histamine, they can trigger mast cell degranulation to dump histamine. And what do histamine issues, mast cell issues cause? AFib, heart palpitations, headaches. So for certain people that are more histamine sensitive, and a lot of my clients are really sensitive to histamine, I like to opt for a good algae vegan sourced one. So it has the same omega 3 structure, right? Same molecule, just lacking all the amines from the fish. Some people do great on it, right? But some people, they'll have a headache. We remove the cod liver oil, their headache goes away, right? We know headaches are from high histamines, right? So, I think having that healthy omega 3 index is really, really important. But if you are histamine sensitive, you may want to make sure, you have proper support for histamine clearance. You're not eating too much fermented foods, right? So you kind of see it's like if you lower the histamine you consume through diet, you should be able to tolerate fish oil better, right? Because
mm,
it's all about the histamine signaling. Think about a bucket, right? If it gets overfilled, then you run into issues. So it's like, how do you want to lower your histamine? Do you want to clean up your gut? Do you want to eat less? Do you want to use DAO enzymes? Do you want to, again, the mold, right? Infections also raise histamine, right? So a lot of different ways you could try to lower it, but usually for a lot of people I work with, I really like the Nordic Naturals and even Metagenics. They have some good algae-based omega-3. That's what I personally take each day. I take around 2 grams EPA and DHA from the algae-based omegas because personally, anything over 1.5 grams, 2 grams of fish-based omega-3s, I start to notice I'm a little more revved up. I don't get heart palpitations, but I feel it really a little minorly, but it's noticeable. So
mm,
I just opt for the algae based.
mm. Yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, the fish oil and omega 3s, they're kind of different than capsules, these powder capsules, because yeah, you have the actual oil that tends to can ferment or
Yep.
accumulate the histamine. So yeah, it makes sense that it
Well, and it's too,
causes that.
it's not even so much that it's accumulating histamine either. This is independent of, oxidation or any of these other things. Something called scromboid fish poisoning. You ever heard of that before?
No.
So scromboid fish poisoning is when certain types of fish, I think like marlin, I'm trying to remember the exact fish names. That doesn't matter. Either way, certain big fish that people eat, if they're not stored properly, certain bacteria can convert those amines into histamine. And people will eat that and they'll get covered head to toe, bright red, like eczema, rashes, crazy heart palpitations, and they go to the ER. They just give them a Benadryl to block the histamine, right? So I guess my point I was trying to make there was, fish itself has a lot of amines, even regardless of the quality or the source.
Mm,
Doesn't matter. You can have the purest fish oil in the world. it's still going to have a lot of amines, right? So it's not even so much a quality or branding issue. Like cod liver, I think Rosita is like one of the most common cod liver oil brands, and they have very clean products, but that doesn't change the fact there's a lot of amines. And if you're sensitive to amines, whether it's tyramine or histamine, they could be potentially problematic.
Yeah, makes sense. Uh, where do people start with like understanding this if they want to understand their genetics more, or kind of which foods, which supplements affect their like how their yeah like how their genetics affects their foods and supplements?
Yeah, I mean, good starting point. Follow me, right? That's what I try to make content about. I just released some free courses about genetics 101, just the basics of understanding these things, right? I cover a lot of, I think, issues with the genetic space right now. A lot of people want answers, no matter what you think about him, Gary Brecka like really brought a lot of limelight to genetics. And a lot of people are curious, but it's more than just MTHFR, right? And so I have a free course about that. I have a free course, if you listening here enjoyed talking about the cell signaling pathway, right? Histamine, it's not just food or supplements or toxicity, it's all of it together, right? Or the glutamate thing, thinking in terms of pathways really simplifies things. So I told you I released a histamine course, but I have a free primer course leading up to that about understanding from cell signaling, pathways wise. And yeah, I'm working on a lot of really, really cool things to try and educate about this stuff. I also do genetic work one-on-one. So that's the main thing I do with people. If you're someone that's curious and wants to get answers and you tried a lot of things that don't work, I'm really confident here saying that the way I look at the genes is different than most people do because I think a big missing piece of genetics, the space, a lot of people know what the mutations mean. How do you know the pharmacology of what nutrients to use to help those genes, right? So I could see a report. People are put on supplements, but the supplements they use, right? You're helping one thing, but hurting other things. So, yeah, a lot of different ways to learn, but yeah, that's what I really want to make content about, right? These nuanced type things, and it's funny. And some of the comments on my posts, half of it will be people like, oh, you're just fear mongering. This is a bunch of BS. Look at this charlatan, whatever, mumbo jumbo. The other half of people are like, oh my God, I can't tolerate that either, right? Kind of you mentioned the glycine, right? Like, oh my God, I can't. So clearly it matters, just not for everybody. And I really want to educate people which type of health advice you should and shouldn't be listening to based on you, the individual.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, well, it's been great talking with you, and definitely people should check out those courses and information. Before I ask my last question, where can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, so I'm at Dr. Tyler Pansner, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, www.drtylerpanzer.com. I have a free email newsletter as well you could sign up for there. And one thing as well, I want to offer a discount if people want to do one-on-one work with me, from your audience. What would you want the discount code to be?
You can be Siim.
Cool. Let's do that.
SIM.
Yeah. So I'll set it up. So Siim, well, that'll cover the DNA kits I use, cost $150. So that usually what I do. Happy to do that. So you'll get your DNA kit for free. If you already have data, then you'll just get $150 off one of the package offerings I have. I have a few of them. So yeah, I'll get that set up. And yeah, really thank you so much for having me on. This was great to nerd out a little bit deeper on things, right? We're both nerds at heart, right? To dive deep into that. And
Yeah.
yeah, hope you guys listening got some value. Thanks again.
Yeah, it was great. We'll put the links in the show notes. And my last question is, what's this one piece of advice or habit that you wish you adopted sooner?
Allergy testing,
Mm.
food allergy testing. I turns out a lot of my histamine brain fog issues because I was eating peas and almonds every day for lunch. I was allergic and I was working with mice pretty much every day and I'm allergic to mice.
Wow.
I had to go to 5 allergists. The first four would not test me. I didn't sneeze. I didn't have a runny nose. I didn't have the regular classical allergic symptoms. So they told me I didn't have allergies. I'm like, listen, headaches, brain fogging, these are signs of allergies, high histamine. Thank God the fifth one tested me. And I was kind of like, screw all you other guys, right? Because I did have those allergy issues there. It's not just the major symptoms people think of. So yeah, that was one thing I wish I did a lot sooner. If I got hives from the mice, I would have got it checked years before, right?
Mm.
So that was a big aha moment for me.
Mm. So that is not like a food sensitivity test, it's some other allergy test.
Yeah, so the sensitivity tests check for IgG antibodies, which are different than so IgG is in George, IgE as in Eric, that is true allergic reaction. So the food sensitivities can be more transient, centralized around the gut. The IgE and allergy is a body-wide immune system thing. So I got a skin prick test, or you could do an IgE as an Eric blood test versus the sensitivity. Um, it's a good one and done test just to kind of rule things out. Because again, it's not just I'm fine or my throat's going to swell shut. It could
Mm.
be impacting your life, maybe not life threateningly, but life impactingly.
Mm. Yeah, something minor things.
Yep. And the minor things can add up.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a great talking with you, and we'll definitely have to do another follow-up in the future about the other supplements that we didn't cover.
Yeah, we got a lot of them. So happy to do that. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll see you around. All right, that's it for this episode. Make sure you check out my new book, The Longevity Leap, on Amazon. I'd also appreciate if you share this episode with a friend or family member. Other than that, my name is Siim. Stay tuned for the next episode. Stay empowered.